Hello, this is a supplemental podcast for the Introduction to Ethics module. What I'm going to do in this podcast is go over some of the big schools of ethical philosophy and just give you a quite a small reminder. So obviously we go over all of this in the lectures, but this is just so that if in a few weeks' time after the lectures, that part of the lecture is done with, you are not quite sure you've grasped the point, or you want a bit of a reminder, or you're about to write your journal and you want a prompt as to which theories are relevant to what you're about to say, you can listen to this and it will give you just enough information, hopefully, to put things in order so that you know where you're going. I'm going to try and focus on some practical examples, applied ethics. So some of the big schools I want to go over with you are the idea of, we'll start by looking at, where are we? Teleology. Very high tech, as you can see. No shortage of money spent on this one. Teleology comes from the Greek word telos, which means a goalpost. Back in ancient Greece, when they were having foot races and horse races, obviously these days if you're having a foot race, then there's the ribbon that you have to run through, or the winner runs through at the end. Back then they didn't have a ribbon, they had a post, a wooden post, and the first runner or horse past the post won the race, which is where we get the whole idea in politics of first past the post. Election winners, that's where it comes from. So a telos is the goalpost, the thing you're heading to. And in teleological ethics, essentially it's a stage-by-stage process to decide if something is right or wrong, ethical or unethical. You need first off to consider what is the goal we are trying to achieve, and that might vary from situation to situation. Now, in medical ethics, most medical ethics tend to be teleological, in the medicine is quite goal-oriented generally. So for most doctors, the goal of medicine is to take an unhealthy person or an injured, damaged person and restore them to complete health if possible. If that's not possible, then you get them as close to being healthy as you can. Obviously, you might not be able to replace a missing limb or something like that, regrow one as such, but you can get them walking again, you can give them an artificial limb, you can do all sorts of things. So you find ways to get them as close to the goal of full health as possible. That gets quite challenging if you're thinking about psychiatric health, because what is the definition of full mental health? We'll leave that one for now, because that's something we go over in the ethical mind module after Christmas. But to use a case study, a very brief case study, let's think about transgender people. You've got someone who wants to have a sex change operation. They're born male, they want to become female, or they're born female and they want to become male. In some countries, America for example, you can have those operations, but they're all on private healthcare, so you've got to fork out an absolute fortune to pay for them. Let's say the ethical question is a British-based situation. Should the NHS, taxpayers' money, etc., pay for someone to have a sex change operation? Is it ethical? Is it unethical? There's a whole raft of economic questions to do with money, but we'll set those to one side for the moment. From a medical point of view, what is the goal? What is the goal of medicine? What is the goal of the NHS? If the goal is to take an unhealthy person and move them towards a state of health, then what the doctor asks themselves is this treatment going to do that? So you might have a medical treatment that works really, really well and restores health. From a medical point of view, that is ethical, because teleologically it achieves what it's meant to achieve. If you've got another medical treatment that doesn't really do any good, it's a bit of a rubbish treatment, or possibly it's really so bad it makes the individual worse, more unhealthy, sometimes happens, then that would be unethical, because your goal of health is over there and this treatment is not getting anywhere near that. So it gets ambiguous, because something like a sex change operation, it's not, you haven't got a broken arm or a tumour or a disease, it's not an obvious measure of bodily illness. It's a psychological state of unhappiness, of feeling in the wrong body. And there's different ways of considering treatment. So one doctor might say, well, the best treatment for this is counselling and therapy, to get the individual happy being the sex that they were born. Somebody else might say, a different doctor, well, no, surgery, hormonal injections, those sorts of things, so that if this person feels deep down that they're really female, these procedures will move them to a state where outwardly, physically, their biological appearance looks more feminine. They have female genitalia, they can get injections and grow breasts and so on. And that is a more effective treatment, to take someone from a state of deep unhappiness to a state of contentment with their body. It's a slightly murkier because it doesn't always work quite that straightforwardly with some people, but that's the general goal. So that the medical ethicist, the teleologist, would be looking not at the economic arguments as to where the money's come from, who's paying for this, who's paying for that, but they would be looking at, does this treatment work? Yes or no? That's the first question. Does it get us towards the goal of health? Whatever we are defining health as being in this situation, and that's where you get into the ethical arguments and debates, or this is more healthy than that, and so forth. So that's how a teleologist would weigh up that debate. What's best? Counselling, surgery, hormonal injection, some other procedure? What's going to work best to make this individual psychologically, mentally more healthy than they are? We'll come back to that one a bit later. That puts it in a hopefully gives you an idea. Another school of thought is deontology, which is obedience to duty. And there are a variety of schools of deontology. We won't go over them all because we'll be here forever. But deontology says that there are a set of rules in life, and you have to do what is right, not because it moves you towards some desirable state, some desirable goal, which is teleology, and regardless of the consequences. Give an example, one we'll mention in the lectures as well. A famous deontologist called Immanuel Kant said, you should never lie. It's always wrong to be dishonest and to lie. Even if by lying you could prevent some awful thing from happening. So if some lunatic waving an axe runs into the room and says, I'm trying to find my husband or wife to chop their head off, where are they? And you know where that spouse is hiding. Immanuel Kant said you should always tell them, you should give an honest answer, because even lying to save a life is still wrong, because lying is wrong. So it's quite hardline and quite extreme. Now, one of the things we mentioned in the first week was divine command theory. Divine command theory is a type of deontology. So it's a subset of this. Because different deontologists have different ideas as to where these rules come from. Divine command theorists see those rules as emanating from a deity, their god or their goddess, or the gods if it's a polytheist religion, that a deity has set in, well, sometimes quite literally in stone, the idea that thou must do this, thou shalt not do that, and therefore you do it because God says you must. Even if sometimes you're not entirely clear why, but nonetheless you accept on trust that God knows better than you do, and if God says don't eat pork, you don't eat pork, even if you're not wholly sure why you're not meant to eat pork. So for some people, they would look, coming back to this question, should somebody have gender changing surgery? For some people who follow the divine command theory, they would look to their religious book, the Quran, the Bible, the Rig Vedas, whatever it might be, and say, well, in this book it says A, B or C, either yes, and the answer is either yes, God permits it, or no, God does not permit you to have this operation. So they would be looking to that source. Not all people who are deontologists believe there is a divine origin to the rules. Some people argue the rules are influenced by what is good for human survival. They're kind of evolutionary. These are things we've learned over a long period of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years of evolution and development, and we've acquired these standards that are applicable to all people in all cultures, It's consistency, and that's a big feature of deontology. It's not just saying I have to live by these rules. It's also saying, well, you ought to live by these rules too, because God is God for everyone, or evolution is evolution for everyone, or whatever the source of the origin may be. So to give you an example, a chap called William Ross, who developed these 7 duties. We won't go over all of them, but he said there were 7 things like beneficence and non-maleficence and so on, which are consistent rules for running a human society to the greater good for everyone. And some of these are more relevant to a given situation than others. So, for example, you could take self-improvement, the 4th one, down there. Self-improvement is the rule, the law, that we should strive to make ourselves better people and help other people who are trying to make themselves better people. So if someone is studying hard, you should help them. If someone is working hard to earn a living, you should help them. That sort of thing. So you could take the argument that if you've got this person who wants this operation because they feel it will make them happier and more content and better adjusted, and they'll be their real self, and they'll be more productive in life and that kind of thing, then if you are the budget holder for the NHS, then it's your duty to say yes or no to the request for the surgery. Then by approving of it, you are helping them, this individual, to improve themselves and become this fully flourishing, fully flowering individual. You could look at number 7 on this, promise keeping. If some political promise has been made, you vote for me and you can have this, that and the other, then there might be an obligation that if that promise includes the availability of surgery or medical treatments of one sort or another, then that promise should be followed through. So there's all sorts of different ways of understanding whether or not something can be assessed as meeting the requirements of a deontological approach to human development. Then we have a school of philosophy called sometimes Utilitarianism and sometimes Consequentialism. It's essentially the same thing. People sometimes prefer to say consequentialism because it's all to do with assessing the consequences of actions. Several hundred years ago, the term utilitarianism was coined, and utility didn't have quite the same meaning then that it does now. These days it sounds as if it's a little bit harsh, and it isn't really. It's essentially saying assess the morality of an action by what it leads to, or what you hope it will lead to. So somebody says, I would like this operation. You spend the money, you conduct the operation. Are they a happier person, a better person, a healthier person, a more functional person at the end of it? Or are they very unhappy? Are they unwell, or are they in a lot of pain? Is there a good outcome or a bad outcome to the operation? You have to weigh that up. It's to do with assessing pros and cons to gain the maximum amount of happiness for the minimum amount of suffering in the process. And obviously, if you've got to spend a load of money on this thing, then there's less money to spend on that thing. So you would have to say, well, the financial cost, the potential suffering of paying taxes and putting money over here rather than over there, is this amount. The potential gain and happiness and contentment is that amount. So if the gain outweighs the loss, you go for it and you say, yes, this is an ethical thing to do. If the loss is greater than the gain, then you would have to say, no, it's an unethical thing to do. So you can't give a snap judgment without first weighing up the pros and cons of a given request as to whether it's an appropriate line to go down or an inappropriate line to go down. It does assume there is a readily identifiable way of assessing a good outcome, happiness and contentment and pleasure, because what makes one person happy doesn't necessarily make anybody else happy, and some people are made happy by really quite dubious and unpleasant things. You think of Jack the Ripper or somebody like that. Their enjoyments are perhaps things that the rest of us wouldn't want to go along with, and in that case you would say, well, yes, you may enjoy murdering people, but the amount of suffering caused to those people and their friends and their family and so forth is far greater than the thrill that you get from killing them. Therefore, it is unethical for you to pursue your thrills at the cost of so much misery to other people. And you could think about that in the context of things like vegetarianism and meat eating and so forth. The last one we'll have a little look at is virtue ethics. Virtue ethics dates all the way back to ancient Greece, arguably earlier as well. And they didn't tend in virtue ethics to get into arguments about specific actions. This is a right action, this is a wrong action. These are the rules, these are the laws, these are the consequences. That sort of thing didn't bother them. The virtue ethicists said there is a character at the heart of each person, a character which they develop by action. Aristotle said we are what we repeatedly do. So if you keep doing something often enough, you become it. Therefore, you can change your character by commitment to a course of action. So it's in that element, it's quite optimistic, because it sees that even somebody who's quite nasty today could one day in the future be a much better person by practicing goodness. Aristotle and other Greeks drew up lists of desirable character traits: honesty, compassion, generosity, prudence, a whole great list of things. And their argument to any moral question, should I do this, should I do that, was to say, what would a morally upstanding person do? What would a kind person do? What would a generous person do? What would an honest person do? If you are that good, kind, honest, etc. person, you would instinctively, they argued, instinctively behave in the right way. Therefore, rather than getting too bogged down in the ins and outs of a specific situation, you just think, be a good person, then you'll know what to do. So if you are a very compassionate doctor, and somebody comes to you and says, I want this operation, and you see they're in distress, and you know how to perform the operation, and you know that operation will make them a better, will make them a happier person, your compassion would lead you to want to give that operation, because your instinct would be to help, would be towards kindness. It's not a wholly clear-cut matter, because sometimes virtues may be, in a sense, in contradiction to each other. So prudence, not wasting money, not splurging stuff. You could be asked to do something to help someone, a compassionate act, but the thing you need to do is very, very expensive and extravagant. It's an imprudent act. So your virtue of compassion and your virtue of prudence might not necessarily be pulling you in the same direction. One part of you may be saying, oh, that's way too expensive, and another part of you may be saying, but it's very kind and caring. So it's not a wholly clear-cut issue, but their argument was that ethics emanate from good character, and that someone who has a bad character tends to be unethical. But if they want to change, they can change. It just takes time. And practicing honesty, practicing kindness, practicing gratitude, which is a thing often talked about these days, especially in Buddhist circles and so on. So there are ways of approaching ethical dilemmas from these different schools and thinking, how would I respond, how would I behave in this given course of action? So when you're writing your journal and you've chosen your moral dilemma and you're thinking, well, I think this about it, you're reading a few books, you're looking at a few documentaries and what have you, one of the things I'd like you to consider is which philosophical school seems relevant to what you're doing. Are you drawn to virtue ethics or deontology or teleology or what have you? How do you view this moral problem through the lens of the school of philosophy you feel drawn to, that you feel is appropriate to understand this moral situation? That's something we can talk about more in class, but hopefully that's given you a bit of a reminder of what you'll hear in the lectures, so that if it fades with the course of time, you can replay this and it will prompt your recollections. If it doesn't, or if you need a bit more background information, get in touch, and I'm perfectly happy to go over things in more detail with you.